Hi, everybody. Welcome to our workshop as part of the CTE Momentum Your Place in Space Challenge, brought to you by MaxIQ Space. And today we're going to be looking at space agriculture, growing food in outer space. And our special guest today is Jacob Pepperseed Torres. And I'm your facilitator. I'm Judy Sandrock, and I'm from MaxIQ Space. Just as a note, please post your questions in the chat during the main presentation. Let's have a look at our agenda for today. First, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the challenge itself and the role that MaxIQ Space is playing in terms of the challenge. We have our special guest presentation from Jacob Torres. We'll have a Q&A session with Jacob. And if there's a lot of questions coming through in the chat, then what we'll do is we'll ask Jacob just to pause while we address those questions before we continue. And then we'll be looking at how do we apply what we've learned in this session. And we'll also have a look at what questions would you have for the team that's managing and running the challenge, because maybe there's something that we need to include that we haven't included, and we can take that feedback to the team, to CTE Momentum for the challenge, Your Place in Space. So let me do a quick introduction. This year's challenge, CTE challenge across the USA, is having a look at your place in space. And really it is to have a look at what products, services, business models that groups can come up with and present as part of the challenge. And those products and services and business models need to really apply within this rapidly growing space industry that thankfully a number of you in the audience are going to be able to participate in the future. And what is the role of MaxIQ Space? We're an international organization. This accent that you hear, this is a South African accent. MaxIQ Space is made up of a number of us, a number of US based specialists as well as international specialists. And really, we're a bunch of engineers who are wanting to inspire youngsters to pursue a career in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, specifically in the space industry. If I'm selfish about it, what I'm doing is that I'm actually doing what I would have loved to have seen when I was at high school. So that's a little bit of background to us. And what are we doing in terms of this challenge? What we are doing is we're providing some support, some content, connecting you with specialists so that you're able to build your proposal as best as you would like to before you submit it for the CTE Momentum Challenge. And I think with that, Jacob, what I'm going to do is let me hand over to you. Please feel free to share the screen. And if you don't mind, I had put you on mute earlier. So yeah, I can see you've unmuted. Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Judy. What an honor it is to meet you. What an honor it is to be here today on behalf of the NASA Space Biology team to talk to you a little bit about what NASA is doing to grow plants on space, and then our plans to grow plants on the moon and Mars to feed the astronauts and do all kinds of other amazing things. So I have some slides today that I worked with together from a very special person named Dr. Joya Massa, who's a project scientist at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I was able to talk to her that I was going to be talking to you today, and she worked with me to share these slides that I'm going to share with you. And so I'm just going to bring them up and I'll start going through them, and I'll tell you a little bit about space biology. Awesome. So again, these are my friend, Dr. Joya Massa's slides. This is what she shares with students when she's talking about NASA space biology. We are so lucky that we have two plant growth systems on the International Space Station. One of them is veggie. The second one is advanced plant habitat. In those two systems, we have been blessed to be able to grow many types of crops. Initially, we started with leafy greens, things that don't need to be pollinated, but you couldn't live on lettuce alone. You have to diversify the types of food that you grow, which means doing pollination, growing over a long duration, growing plants in the specific environment of the space station. And so those are things that we're working on. We started with leafy greens and now we're doing things like peppers and tomatoes, which require pollination and then they grow fruit. Our team is made up of many amazing people from around the world, engineers like myself and scientists, microbiologists, all types of characters come together for us to do this amazing thing to grow plants for the astronauts. There's things where you have to build hardware. Microbiology has to ensure the food safety of the food that we grow so the astronauts don't get sick. There's also a lot of science that happens along the way. And so we come together at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where we do this amazing work. And you can see my different team members here. I am the gentleman in the middle there next to Lachelle Spencer. We are in the Greenworks lab at Kennedy Space Center. What are we doing and why are we doing it? NASA has set their sights to going back to the moon, and eventually the moon will become our gateway to Mars. So it's kind of a stage where we're setting up and learning how to do equipment and different things in the environment of the moon, and then eventually we'll go to Mars, and it'll take things like different rovers, satellites that rotate around the planet. We'll have controlled environments. There will just be all types of technologies that are needed for us to be able to live on those surfaces. And unfortunately, one thing that's not shown here is plants. Plants will be an important part of what NASA does during those long duration missions. Why grow plants in space? Why are we doing this work? Of course, it is a lot of fun. We're having a great time. There was this great botanist named Charles Darwin who said that plants require gravity to grow. And so us leaving gravity to grow plants in microgravity goes against his theory that they need to have gravity. So we're doing things like science to understand what happens when plants grow, but the primary things that fuel us to grow plants in space is to generate food for the astronauts. And we know from travelers of past who have done long duration relocations from different parts, where if they have only food that is prepackaged or stored, that illnesses start to creep in, like scurvy and other things. Fresh foods are very important for anybody who's traveling, including our astronauts who are going to go on these long duration missions. Also, you're locked up in this small space for a long time, wherever you're going. If you're in an International Space Station, it's a real small space. If you're in a space capsule going to the moon, you're in together with a group of people. When we go to Mars, the transit to Mars could take 6 months to 2 years, depending on where the planet is when we leave. And so there's great psychological benefit for an astronaut to grow plants while they're on these missions. It keeps them busy and keeps them happy. Plants are also great for helping to recycle our atmosphere. They consume things like CO2, which we breathe out, and then release oxygen. And that helps us to generate a fresh environment for the crew who's living in those areas to breathe and live. And then plants are great for filtering water. You can add almost any water into the root zone. They will drink it up, and then they transpire fresh and pure water, which can be introduced into the environment and then ultimately captured and used to drink. So these are NASA's main motivations for growing plants in space. When we go to the moon, we will grow in things like greenhouses or controlled environments where it's completely sealed in. It protects the astronauts from the outside environment, and inside we can grow plants and do science and different things. And this is just an artist's rendition of something that we may see one day once we start growing and living on these surfaces. Inside of that greenhouse, Maybe we would have plant factories, things that we see here on Earth, which generate a large amount of fresh mass to eat. This is one plant factory that Dr. Ray Willer got to visit at one point, and he took these pictures, and they're growing lettuce here where it continuously delivers an amount of food that whoever is there can eat. You harvest it and then do what you're going to do with it. This is kind of an example of how a greenhouse may be like on the Martian surface. It may just be in a small capsule that's designated specifically for plant growth. We have these type of analogs that we're already testing here on Earth. And the hope is that we can take them up there, the technologies we're developing now, and then take them to different places. And one example is my friend Jess Bunchek, who actually spent more than a year in Eden ISS in Antarctica, where she has this greenhouse here. It's out there by itself. They call it an analog to the International Space Station. And in there, she got to live alone and then grow plants, record data, learn how to clean the irrigation systems, understand how the environmental systems work. She did so many things, learning how to pollinate plants and harvest the flower, all of these things Jess Bunchek got to do. And the hope is that one day we'll be able to mirror what she did on the moon or on Mars. So what plants are we going to grow in space? What are the candidates? So the whole thing is providing a well-rounded kind of nutritious diet for the astronauts. And that means like a lot of things. Now there's challenges to growing crops that are harder. And you can see on the left of the slide here, we have things like lettuce and leafy greens where you can just plant them and then come back 20 some days later and harvest something to eat. But like I mentioned before, you couldn't live on those alone. So we started to grow peppers and radishes, strawberries, and those require pollination. And we figured out ways to use the fans to shake the flowers or have the crew go in and do pollination. They also take a long time to grow. So these are all things that we're trying to learn. And in the end, the hope is that we can start moving towards staple crops, things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, and wheat. Those need extra processing to be able to eat. Also, they require an oven or they need to be cooked. So we don't have that ability to cook on the International Space Station just yet. We haven't figured out how to control a flame in a single spot or to have an oven. The astronauts actually eat prepackaged meals. And it's those prepackaged meals that encourage us to grow plants. What are the main things, the 5 factors that a plant needs to grow in this environment? And this graph kind of shows, what's going on, but you have to maintain a temperature and a humidity that the plants can live within. Light is very important. Plants use photosynthesis to live and to grow. It's really hard to use the sun on the space station because the space station is moving around so much. So you would have to supply lighting for the plants to grow. One of the biggest challenges to growing plants when there isn't gravity is irrigation and watering the plant's root zone. How do you keep the water from floating away? How do you keep the growth media from going all over the cabin? This is one of the main things that I get to work on. I develop irrigation systems and make prototypes to grow plants in that environment. And this is one of the biggest challenges that if you are working on technologies for this class or for this group, water irrigating plants in microgravity is a real big thing that you can make a contribution to. Of course, just like us, plants need to eat. They need fertilizer and food. So fertilizer is the most important part. And then the last part is gas, controlling the gas environment for the plants to bring in CO2 and let out oxygen. Those things all come together to make a plant grow. In the space environment, what is different from here to Earth, from Earth to there? The number one thing is there's no convection. Gravity helps, cold water falls and hot water rises. Well, in space, those things don't happen. So the mixture of the environment isn't a natural thing. So you have to provide a fan or other things to move the air and make sure that the environment is just right. We like white light. That's what we see. But plants, they grow better with different wavelengths. And in fact, using a broad spectrum of light consumes energy that if you can save some of that, it's better for the mission overall. So we tried to use LED lighting where the light recipes used are specific. And in the end, we end up getting this pink output here. And it looks kind of cool, but it may not look good to a human who's working underneath it. I mentioned a little bit about water and how challenging irrigating the plants are. Without gravity, water and air don't mix. Like here, you can have dissolved oxygen in your water. Plants' roots actually need air to breathe. And so creating that environment in the microgravity is really difficult. And there's kind of a picture here where it shows a sphere of water and then a ball of air in the middle. And so this is one of our biggest challenges to growing plants in space. And then fertilizer is heavy to launch. Could we grow things to help the plants grow by recycling up in space? Now, you can stop me if I'm going too long, but I just want to show you that this is one of the labs that we have. This is the International Space Station. In here is where Veggie is in the advanced plant habitat. There are different crew quarters for different countries where they do amazing experiments, demonstrations, all of these things. And our crew, our astronauts get to go up there and do work. And then teams like mine work in places like Kennedy Space Center or schools, universities around the country and world where they do experiments, send them up to space, let the astronauts test them, record data. Many times we have a camera or we have sensors that are recording things that we can see on Earth. And it's just so much fun. I have a blast. I still feel like a kid when I get to work on these amazing things. And it's just like the funnest thing that I can imagine ever. Maybe I will stop and just check
Wonderful.
in with everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a question for you. We don't have any questions yet in the chat, but I certainly have a question for you. When I introduced you, you have a nickname. So please give us a little bit of background to that nickname.
Oh, absolutely. Let's see. Let's jump forward a little bit. I mentioned that there are 2 plant growth systems on the space station, and that till now, we have only grown leafy greens, things that don't require pollination, but we have to diversify. We have to be able to grow fruits and vegetables and rice and all of these things. So when I came in as an intern in 2018 with NASA at Kennedy Space Center, they were talking about growing peppers. I am from New Mexico, and I'm actually in New Mexico right now. And one of our big things are growing chilies. New Mexico chili is a staple crop for us. It's our main food. It's our main crop. And when NASA started talking about peppers to grow in space, I said, oh, I know peppers. So we threw New Mexico peppers into the mix, and ultimately those peppers were in that International Space Station environment. What I'm showing here is the advanced plant habitat, and in there are these pepper plants growing. Those plants are Espanola improved peppers, and I'm from Espanola, New Mexico. So I got to grow my hometown crop on the International Space Station as the first fruit grown in space. And while I did it, I wanted to share that experience with everybody. So we started a group called the Space Chili Grow a Pepper Plant Challenge, where you can send an email to me, and I put an envelope of seeds together with stickers and some instructions, and you grow a plant at home or you're in your classroom to create a data point that goes into a database. And then that helps NASA select plants to grow in space. And ultimately, we grew my hometown crop on the International Space Station. And now we're looking towards growing plants on the moon. And I got Jacob Pepperseed because Johnny Appleseed was somebody who spread seeds around the Northwest. Well, I got to spread pepper seeds around the world. And so that's kind of where my name came from.
So thank you so much for that, a little interlude. I actually think, please continue. It's really very interesting, especially when you point out the different aspects of what we need to grow plants. I had never ever thought or realized that the water and the air won't mix, because as a chemical engineer, I do know that dissolved carbon dioxide in water is absolutely crucial to plant growth. And so that is really, really interesting, is that the gravity really assists in that solubility of the gases. Wonderful. So please, I'm going to hand back to you.
Sure. Well, I have to jump in and follow you, but that I didn't know that water and air didn't mix in space as well. So when I showed up at Kennedy Space Center and they started talking about it, that got my mind going on systems that I had worked on while I was in school. One system used a passive method to circulate water to heat it on a solar panel. So solar water heating, when the water would get hot, it would make the water expand, it would rise, and then once it got cold, it would fall, and it created this natural passive movement of the water. So when we started to talk about inventing irrigation systems for space, I eventually came up with an idea called the passive porous tube nutrient delivery system, which uses capillary force of water to wick water up to the root zone. And then as the plants grow, they use evaporation and transpiration to pull the water out, and it just creates a passive method to irrigate the plants. So that's one of the things that I got to do. I wish I had that in my slides, but the things that you do in school and are learning now can be applied to different problems that are being solved in space. And that's what's going to happen as you all get to work on your different projects. You'll maybe relate to something that you've seen at home or in school, and then come up with solutions to build ideas for NASA. And that's what worked out for me. Uh, where I'm showing here is our current large plant growth research capabilities on the International Space Station. And I did mention that we had two systems. One of them is Veggie. Veggie is on the top here. And Veggie is very simple. All it is a light with a bag around it, and then you can grow plants in what we call plant pillows. You grow 6 plants at a time. It's an open system to the environment that the astronauts grow in, and it's a lot of fun because the astronauts get to actually put their hands on it. The next system is called the Advanced Plant Habitat, or the APH, and that one is, we call maybe Veggie's big sister, where it has 183 sensors that controls the lighting, the irrigation, the temperature, the humidity, CO2. We have control of it at a computer at Kennedy Space Center, where we can turn things on and off and record data. So between these two systems, we are learning what it takes to grow crops without microgravity, and also doing science where different teachers and PIs are learning things that they can do. But each experiment requires hardware, or they need something special to help keep the plants up, or a different type of fertilizer. And so it's the first time that many of these things have been done. And that's what we're doing at Kennedy's, where we're building these. This is actually Veggie right here. This is on the International Space Station. And all it really is just a simple light with a bag around it. And then these have Veggie pillows where you plant them at Kennedy Space Center on the ground, and then launch them up where the astronauts add water to them. You see a lot of machinery and equipment. It's very artificial, it looks, but we get to grow nature out of those things. And I think that the astronauts welcome that, because they're surrounded by all of this hardware and machines, and it's probably pretty cool to see something green growing from time to time. Here are some of the astronauts and some of the comments that they mention about having plants in space. And Scott Kelly is one of our rock stars who grew plants in space, or his thing were the zinnias. We grew zinnias in Veggie in 2014. It was the first time that we had grown them in that system. Zinnias had been grown by other countries before in the past, but not to maturity. And it kind of was a disaster in the beginning. We sent 6 of these plant pillows, and you can see in the top right, there's the zinnia, and there's this black box there. That black box is filled with growth media, time-release fertilizer, and then it has a little port where the astronauts can inject water to keep the plants growing. And that's how we keep everything from floating away. The 6 of them that we sent, 3 of them didn't grow at all. And then 2 of the other ones were completely failing. They had mold and stuff growing on them. I heard about the team talk about what was happening and how hard it was. In the end, it turned out that just one of the fans wasn't working. And we weren't up there to take a look at it to understand what was happening, but the natural convection, which I was talking about before, where we circulate the water, the air within the environment, that wasn't happening. So the plants were just having a hard time. We were very blessed that Scott Kelly at the time asked for permission to take over. So Commander Scott Kelly took command, and in the end, those plants ended up growing, and he harvested them on Valentine's Day, which was pretty cool. So here they are in the end, and you can see these plant pillows. The ones in the bottom there, there's nothing growing in them. And with the 2 or 3 plants that we had, we ended up having them bloom again and again. But this story is really important to understand how science works. It was, by our metric, a complete failure in the beginning because our plants weren't growing. The ones that were had mold on them. We thought that we had lost them, but then Scott Kelly took them over, and then they grew great. And that just kind of shows how science is. It isn't always perfect. Many times it's trial and error. You can try and demonstrate things, but once you actually get there, many times it doesn't work out, but you find a way through. And so the zinnias are one of my favorite stories because I get to see how the NASA team reacted to what was not going to be good, and it turned out really awesome. And in the end, I actually got to get some of these flowers, and we grew them in the lab. I was one of the interns who got to grow these seeds, and it was just so much fun. We've learned so much through the zinnias, but there's been so many experiments that grow in that system. The crew seems to love it. You see them taking pictures and having fun. We actually get calls from the astronauts from the International Space Station. If you actually get a call from the space station, it says space on the phone, which is interesting. You know, sometimes it says spam or wherever you're calling from. If you get a call from the International Space Station, it says space. And so the astronauts seem to have a great time. It really helps with their spirits to have fun. And while they're on these missions, they're growing plants, and then they get something fresh to eat. And so it's all of these great things. We're really lucky to be part of such an amazing project. This is the advanced plant habitat. There are experiments on the APH called the pH experiments or plant hab. There's Plant Hab 01, which grew this crop called Arabidopsis. Arabidopsis is something that's very popular with the scientists who do different things to understand what's happening between the two environments, like genomic sequencing and collecting seeds and all those other things. This is what I primarily work in. I get to build the hardware, the lids, the wicks, and other things that grow these plants. This one is PHO2 that we did during the pandemic. It's, you know, when the shutdown actually happened, we had a great opportunity to step up our work because a lot of things got canceled. So we got to do this one called PHO2, which grew radishes on the International Space Station. And I wish I had a better picture, but the radishes actually grew above the growth media. And those are things that we tested and worked on in the lab, and then they got to grow in space. And you can see here that they grew very well. There aren't any bald spots in there. And so we were very happy. I talked a little bit about space chili. This one is PH04, plant habitat 04. And the deal is that we had grown tons of lettuce, tons of leafy greens. We can make great salads, but that really doesn't provide very much nutrition to the astronauts. And if we want to get more vitamins to them, that we'll have to start growing fruits and vegetables. And there are no bees in space, so how do we pollinate? And also, do we have the time to grow these crops? Which this one's actually took 137 days. We grew green peppers, harvested them at day 80, and then at day 137, the astronauts harvested red. And so that's a very long time to have the lights turning on and off, to have the astronauts going in to check in, and it just hadn't been done before. And so this one was the first time where we actually grew a fruit in space. And like I mentioned before, it was an Espanola improved, which is, I'm from Espanola. That's where I'm at now, in fact. And I got to grow my hometown crop in space, which was really cool. And what I do is I build the wicks. So you can see this box down here. The box at the bottom is called the science carrier. It's broken up into 4 quadrants, and in each one, you can fill it up with growth media. Growth media is just something that holds the water and the fertilizer. It allows the roots to grow through. We cannot use soil because it has organic matter in it, and there's potential to have pathogens in that, which can get released into the ISS. So we want to do everything we can to try not to contaminate that environment up there. And so what we have to do is sterilize and sanitize the root zone of our plants. But I get to build all of these things. You see these blue stems here are plant holders, and what they do is just help the plants stay up. We didn't know if without gravity would they need some kind of support. I 3D printed those in the lab. There are all these wicks down here where we did horticultural testing. The white part are actually crew wiper wicks. They're the paper towels that the astronauts use on the space station. We put those into the growth media, glued the seeds on there with Elmer's glue, and then launched them up to the space station where the astronauts added water, and it was really cool. So for 137 days, we had a space flight experiment going on, and we got text messages and emails, and I got to be on the news and all of these great things. So along with doing science and doing horticulture, you also get to interact with many people and do so many fun things. It's just so great. And then after that, once we were able to demonstrate pollination, then tomatoes were the next natural thing to do. This was Joya Mass's experiment as well, where she wanted to test how plant growth varies under different intensities of light. She used a red rich light and the blue rich light. There's two veggies on the space station, and she grew red robin tomatoes under those two different conditions, and then tried to understand what the differences are and using different light recipes. So that was Veg 05. And again, you can kind of see that some of them didn't grow. There's this pillow, which is right up front, and there isn't the plant there and stuff. And it doesn't always go perfect. You know, you spend a lot of time, you can grow your plants in the lab, everything goes just right, but you never know until you get up into the space environment how things are going to live and how they're going to work. And it can get very stressful at times, but in the end, you kind of figure out what valuable information is there, and then try to capture it and then report on it later. And so I kind of guess I got through my slides, but in the end, Veggie, Advanced Plant Habitat, and the Space Crop Production Team is working to provide fresh nutrients for the astronauts. They need to have vitamins and things to help them through their missions. I didn't really mention one big part was that the crew eats pre-packaged meals. They're made at Houston. They're made in Houston at Johnson Space Center. They launch up to the crew. Currently on the ISS, it's not a problem because we come up and down fairly frequently and we can send fresh food up to them. But when we go to the moon or even Mars, we may have to send that food in advance, and it may sit there for a while before the astronauts get to it. During that time, just like any food, nutrients degrade over time, the vitamins degrade over time, the taste of the food goes bad. And just like any of us, if it doesn't taste good, we will try to do anything we can to eat other things, and we may not eat at all if it tastes really, really bad. So it's really important for NASA to find ways to give the crew things that they want to eat, things that taste good, but that also provide nutrients for them to be able to handle their mission that they're doing. In the end, this whole work is for the astronauts. It's all about the crew, keeping them healthy. When they go into their environments, their bodies are going to be stressed out in many ways because there's different gravity on the moon, different gravities on Mars. There's no gravity up in space or low Earth orbit. And our bodies are reacting in different ways. Providing food and keeping them healthy is very, very, very important, as is making sure that they're occupied and having fun, keeping them from feeling down, making it feel like they're involved in things. And so all of these things come together that makes space biology very important. And in space biology, there is growth and equipment that has never been made or built. It's going to be up to us and the generation that we're speaking to come together to create these technologies that in the success of these NASA missions like the Artemis and going to the moon and even future ISSs is going to be on our ability to provide solutions to grow those things. And I have a lot of fun being a part of it. I can't wait to see all of you and the things that you come up during your time as well. I know it's going to be amazing.
Jacob, thank you so very much. We do have two questions.
Yeah.
One is from Ted Tagami and the other is from Rebecca Mayer. So Ted, I was wondering, maybe I think you should ask this question yourself if you're able to unmute and join us. Jacob, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing your screen, and then I'll go back to the slides later. Great. Ted, over to you.
Let me just try to find my video there. Jacob, man, oh, you're so inspiring every time I listen to you. You know, what I know that our students don't know, and then your journey is an incredible journey. And I know a lot of students right now wonder how they can do the really cool things you've talked about. And your journey isn't direct, right? Like a lot of people just think, oh, you study this, you study that, and you go apply and you're in. And so I'm really fascinated by how you got to where you are today. And I think the students would be very excited about that as well. So won't you share that with us?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Ted. I appreciate it. And yes, my path is what you would call untraditional. There's probably no tradition at all for what happened to me. But yes, I'm from this very small hometown. We have few resources. We don't have many things in our schools. I was just hoping to graduate. That's all I wanted. And in the end, I did graduate high school. But afterwards, I didn't think that college was something that I wanted to be involved in. So I went and worked out. I worked at different jobs. I started in restaurants where I bussed tables and I washed dishes and I worked for tips and all of these things. And it wasn't long before I realized that I could be an old man and still be mopping the floor and doing this work. And those are really honorable jobs and great things to do. But in my heart, I felt like I had more. So it wasn't until a little bit later in my 20s where I let that go and I signed up for classes at the local community college. For me, it started with just wanting to fix my car. Every time my car would break, it would cost $400 to change the fuel filter, or $400, or to change the oil. These are things I felt that I could do. So I started to take automotive technology classes. My hope at that time was maybe I can learn how to do and work on cars. They also was a renewable energy program where I learned how to install solar panels. And that was my hope. I didn't have a vision to work for NASA. I didn't know what space biology was. All of those things just weren't anything that was explained to me. But as I went to school, I started to see different opportunities come up. I would keep showing up. And when I kept showing up, more things would start to happen. And I would take the opportunity to be involved in the different projects. Eventually, I got pulled in to do a 4-year degree. I have a bachelor's in science and mechanical engineering. After I finished my degree in that, I went and worked in the field as an engineer where I developed a diesel engine. So I'm an engineer who actually developed an engine. But I was in Indiana. I had the opportunity to go to an amazing school called Purdue University. I went to Purdue to write a master's thesis on phytoremediation, which uses plants to filter air. At that time, I still wasn't thinking about NASA. There's no way that I would be able to get a job like that. But a little while into my schooling at Purdue, I had an idea to see if there was internships, maybe a NASA internship. I really liked Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the Mars rovers, the Voyagers, all of the probes that they send to space. I felt like I could do that. So I Googled NASA internships and came up, this thing came up, an application. And I was like, okay, cool. So I applied for the application. In that NASA application, you can apply for 15 different opportunities in one. And I applied for JPL. I applied for Johnson Space Center to work on spacesuits. I applied for all these things. And then there was one line that said, plant growth for food production and microgravity. I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. So I clicked on that. And in the end, I got one call and one call only. And it was from Dr. Joya Massa at Kennedy Space Center. I interviewed with her. She gave me 10 weeks to go down to Florida and to work in the lab. I think that because I was a little bit older, I knew that this was a special opportunity. So I used those 10 weeks to work as hard as I could. I tried to find gaps where they needed them. And in the end, there was a full-time position. I applied for it and I became Jacob the scientist / intern for the long term. But in the end, it really was just applying. I kept showing up. I wasn't quite sure what I was going after or who I was going to become, but I knew that if I kept going there, that opportunities would arise, and that I knew that if I applied for different things, that I would have the opportunity to be a part of amazing things. So you never know unless your name is in the hat. You never know if you're going to get something unless you put your name in there. If you don't get in, you don't know how close you were. And that's a thing that I've seen with my team, especially, that if you don't get something one semester, or if you don't get it 1 year, if you try again, if you refine your application to try and make it better and apply again, they typically may pick you up then. So they really love to see people who keep trying. They love to see people who keep trying, but also try to improve their application. Maybe the funding wasn't available at the time, and it is this year. Maybe the need wasn't there for your skill, but it is now. So keep trying, try again. Don't give up. That in the end, that was how I got here. I just haven't given up yet, and that's how I am who I am.
Wow, that was very inspiring. Thank you very much for sharing that journey with us. And I must say, I picked up on your tenacity and your determination in terms of problem solving when you described the challenges that the astronauts were having with some of the projects, and how and how eventually what they did is that they persevered in terms of troubleshooting, and then they actually discovered that that fan wasn't working, whatever it was, and I think that is what's really, really so crucial in terms of being a great engineer, is we have to master troubleshooting, because entropy makes sure that nothing works perfectly every single time exactly the same way. And also the thing is that when we can design things right down to the last molecule, and it's not necessarily going to work that way. And by not giving up, that is actually how we succeed. And quite often, especially when I engage with middle schoolers or high schoolers, and they're doing their projects and they get frustrated because maybe it didn't work the first time, maybe it didn't work the second time. What I always do is I always share with them, if it works the first time for me, I'm actually concerned that maybe it's a little bit simple. Because the thing is that we only really know where the weaknesses are when things fail. The challenge is, if it works perfectly, we don't really know how long it's going to work for. Is it going to work next time, etc. And I think it was Elon Musk, somebody in the early days of them, reusing their boosters. Somebody asked him, or somebody asked one of the astronauts, "Aren't you concerned that you're using secondhand equipment?" He's like, the answer was, "I never want to fly on a brand new airplane. I want to fly on an airplane that I know has taken off and landed so many times we can't count anymore." So yeah, I think that from an engineering, design, and innovation perspective, that's absolutely crucial, to have that absolute determinism of just not to give up. So Jacob,
Absolutely.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
Rebecca, absolutely. Rebecca, are you in a position to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it on your behalf?
I can ask my question. I'm joined on my personal laptop and in this conference room. So hi, Jacob. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is so fascinating and really inspiring. You know, one of the things, you talked a lot about the impact of growing plants in space for the space industry and for astronauts and all of the science that we're pursuing in space. But I'm curious if there are implications for agriculture on Earth and sort of what lessons and what you learn about space biology translates to what we grow and eat here on Earth.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Thank you so much for helping me with that. Yes, so it's actually written into the NASA core mission that the research that we do is also intended to help here things on Earth, also with education and developing technologies. And we have been able to do things in space where normally you wouldn't be able to develop these different irrigation or lighting systems, growing plants with harsh environments with almost no water at all. You know, those are things that usually aren't funded just to grow on Earth, but we have an opportunity to do that because we're going to experience them in space and on the moon. So the answer is yes, the things that we do apply here on Earth. In particular, like the fertilizer, time-release fertilizer is used in areas where soil isn't that great, where it's hard to bring nutrients into them, that we can do. If we can develop fertilizer that time releases over time, doesn't get lost through the irrigation. And that's what happened with our FluoroCan system. The lighting systems, one of the biggest discussions about controlled environment agriculture is the energy that goes into it. Is that input worth the amount? Is that energy input enough worth the amount of yield that we get? So we've been excited and blessed to be able to work on recipes that only use the frequencies of light that are needed. You only use the electricity that you absolutely need to grow the plants, and then those get applied here on Earth. The drought we do, drought, like the pepper grow outs, growing in these irrigation systems that are growing in space or on the moon, actually really apply to growing in the desert, places that don't have a lot of resources. Controlled environment agriculture, you can grow year round. It doesn't matter what the weather is. That if we needed to get fresh crops to specific places that don't have fields, that you can do controlled environment growth in those areas to bring fresh food to those many places. So in the end, we are doing this like great research. And in fact, I met a gentleman here in Santa Fe not too long ago who mentioned, you were with the NASA team? And I go, yeah, I'm with the NASA team. He's like, do you know about the BIOS lights? And I was like, yeah, actually I got to develop the BIOS lights in the lab. He's like, well, that's what we use in our lab, and we weren't able to do that until now. And so I do actually hear from farmers about technologies that we develop for space that are being used here on Earth. And that is like just like a really, really exciting thing for us to see that. And it is this work, we just have a unique mission where we could get to do things that normally wouldn't get done. And then now we have a trial or a benefit that we can use on Earth. That is like our huge whole dream come true of it all. Yeah. I hope that was a good answer.
Absolutely. Rebecca, thank you very much for that question. Yes, because very often, as I mentioned at the start, I'm South African, and we have a small economy, and it's really there has to be kind of like budget triage, you know, in terms of what is the country going to spend money on. And very often, taxpayers will legitimately question, why are we doing things in space when we should be looking after our local communities, etc.? So the point that you bring home is absolutely correct. When we are doing anything in space, we are extremely limited in terms of all types of resources, energy, water, everything like that. So the thing is that is actually a great training ground for us. I was actually thinking about it earlier in terms of disaster relief. You know, we have areas where fields are completely washed away in floods. and that kind of thing, or with their fires have gone through and nobody has a crop that year. So Jacob, thank you very much for that. I'm not seeing any more questions, and we actually have been going, wow, for 50 minutes. So thank you very much for that. What I'd like to do is, I'm not sure if you just want to wrap up in terms of maybe any suggestions that you have for the groups in CTE schools, perhaps to look at. What do you, in other words, you get requests from the astronauts on the space station. You get requests from the teams who are developing the technology for us to go back to the moon and to Mars and beyond. So what do you think would be what are those kind of pressing needs that you believe that they have in terms of being able to grow food in space at scale?
Sure. The big thing is that everything that we need here on Earth, the astronauts are going to need up there. A lot of those things are, even though there's an Earth version, there may be a version that needs to work in partial G or in microgravity. And those are not built or made yet. All of us have a specific special experience or something that we're working on, something that we're into. And it turns out that NASA needs that you probably know something better than NASA does because you work with it and live with it every day. And so as you are working towards your place in space and your technology that you're going to send up, what is it that's in front of you that you think that the astronauts are going to need? And what can you do to develop a version that can be used during missions like that? That's what is really, really going to be needed, because you are here, you're using it, you know this technology well. Think about what you can do to adapt it to work in a space environment or to work on the moon, and then reach out and apply for an internship or look for a job with NASA. Don't be afraid, because you know what? They need all of us, all of the things, the technologies, the type of engineering that you're doing, chemical, electrical, mechanical. We need all of those things to come together. And what can you do to make the things that you have here on Earth work for them on those missions? And that is really, really what you would be able to do. I always say it, and it sounds like probably weird or whatever, but you know what? If you have an idea, there's something that you feel inside that you feel like, I can do this, follow your dreams, follow that energy, use that energy to apply for something. Write down what your idea is in your living room. Start a little experiment testing it out, take pictures of it. You never know when that is going to be needed. I also want to put in there that I know we've talked about so many things and then questions come up later. You can totally reach out to me. In fact, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and just send me a message if you have an idea. Jacob, how did you do this? Jacob, how long did you go to school? Hey, I have an idea for this technology that I'm doing at home. What do you think? Feel free to send a message to me. I'm totally excited to talk about new things and to see what it is. But in the end, and I think I keep saying in the end, but just don't give up. Failure, and we talked about that, is actually a good thing, because you see how things work when they fail, and then you can fix it and then make the technology better. I get discouraged when things go bad. You would spend hours trying to make it work, and then it doesn't work, and it's so hurtful, and you want to quit, but you have a demonstrated way that it's not supposed to work. Now you can try another thing to make it live. So just keep going, follow your dreams, and have fun. Don't be too hard on yourself when things don't work the way they're supposed to. You just keep going and roll with it.
So once again, Jacob, thank you very much. That was really fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I learned so much. Yeah, I'm gonna do something in the living room. I'm gonna be growing something in the living room. And Ted, thank you so much for the introduction. Really absolutely
Pleasure.
fantastic. And Rebecca, thank you also very much for your contribution. And I'm sure that the team is looking forward to those submissions, all those fantastic ideas that everyone's having. Jacob, as you said, you know, we work with, we use it every single day. How can we make sure that it can be used in microgravity or lower gravity? So with that, thank you once again. And for those of you who joined us, thank you very much for joining. And what I'm going to be doing is I will be sending out the link to the video once it's been edited. Great. And so with that, wow, great growing. And Jacob, once again, thank you for your inspiration. And we're going to see a lot more of you, I'm sure, because you're going to be doing lots of interesting things in your career.